The moment is burned into my memory like a brand. April 14th, 6:47 in the morning, the smell of antiseptic and fresh flowers in room 214 of Mercy General Hospital, and my wife, Colonel Anna Holt, decorated Army officer, the woman I had loved for 11 years, was laughing softly while her ex-boyfriend, Derek Cole, cradled our newborn son against his chest. Not me. Not the father. Not the men who had sat in that same hospital for 19 hours without sleep, who had held Anna's hand through every contraction, who had ugly cried the moment Dr. Reeves placed our son into the world at 4:23 that morning. Derek Cole, the men Anna had dated before me, the men she had always described as, just someone from before, the men I had politely tolerated at her unit's social events for years, was holding my son. My son, Noah James Holt, who was exactly 2 hours and 24 minutes old. I stood in the doorway with a cardboard tray carrying 2 coffees and a blueberry muffin for Anna, still in the same wrinkled clothes I'd been wearing since the day before. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The air left my lungs like someone had pressed a fist through my sternum. Anna looked up and saw me. Her face shifted, not guilt, not at first, but something that looked uncomfortably like being caught. Then she arranged her expression into a smile. "Larry, look who stopped by." Derek heard the news and wanted to congratulate us. Derek glanced up at me. He had the decency to look mildly uncomfortable, but he didn't move. He didn't stand up, didn't immediately hand my son back. He gave me a half nod, like we were acquaintances at a grocery store, and then he looked back down at Noah with a soft smile that made my stomach turn to concrete. "Big guy," Derek said quietly, adjusting his grip on my child. I set the coffees down on the bedside table. I set them down slowly and deliberately, because if I didn't give my hand something careful to do, I didn't know what I would do with them. "How long has he been here?" I asked Anna. My voice came out flat, which was the best I could manage. "About 15 minutes, Anna said, and her tone had an edge of warning in it, like I was the one behaving unusually. "He was just leaving." Derek finally stood, finally extended Noah toward me, and I took my son and held him against my shoulder, and I turned my back on Derek Cole entirely. I didn't shake his hand. I didn't say goodbye. I heard Anna murmur something polite to him, heard the door click shut, and then there was just me and Noah and the sound of monitors beeping and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Larry," Anna said behind me. "Don't," I said. "He's just a colleague now. We're in the same brigade." I couldn't exactly. He held our son before I got back from a coffee run. I turned around and looked at her then, and I wanted her to see everything on my face. "Our son is 2 hours old, Anna. 2 hours. And you let Derek Cole hold him." She had the grace to look away. But she didn't apologize. Not really. She said something about it not being a big deal, said Derek was practically family to her unit, said I was making something out of nothing. And I stood there holding our newborn son, listening to my wife explain why her ex-boyfriend holding our child wasn't something I should be upset about, and I felt something shift inside me. Something foundational. I need you to understand who Anna was to me, or who I thought she was. We met at a 4th of July barbecue at her parents' house in Charlottesville, Virginia. She was 26 and already a first lieutenant, confident and sharp, with a laugh that could fill a room and eyes that made you feel like the only person she'd ever looked at. I was 27, a structural engineer who had never dated anyone in the military and had no idea what I was walking into. Within 8 months, I was driving to Charlottesville to ask her father for permission to propose. Within 18 months, we were married. I gave up a job offer in Seattle to stay close to her duty station. I managed every household move, 4 states in 11 years, while maintaining a remote consulting practice that I'd built from the ground up specifically to have the flexibility her career demanded. I learned the rank structure, the customs, the unwritten rules of military spousal life. I cooked dinners that were always either too early or too late depending on when she got home. I attended every formal event in uncomfortable dress clothes and made small talk with generals I'd never met. I did all of it gladly, because Anna was worth it, because our marriage was worth it, because I genuinely believed we were the kind of couple people looked at and thought, they're going to be okay. She had mentioned Derek when we first started dating, briefly, like a footnote. They'd dated for about a year in her early military career. He was still in the Army, still in her orbit professionally, and Anna had always been breezy about it in the way that people are breezy about things they want you not to examine too closely. I had taken her at her word. 11 years, and I had taken her at her word about Derek Cole. She'd gotten pregnant last year after we'd been trying for almost 2 years. We were both 37. The pregnancy was hard on her physically, but she powered through the way she powered through everything, and I had been beside her for every appointment, every midnight craving run, every night she couldn't sleep and needed me to rub her back and talk her down from anxiety. I was there for all of it. I was there. And then I came back from getting her coffee. I spent the rest of that hospital stay in a fog. I held Noah, I handled the paperwork, I called both sets of parents with the good news. Anna's mother, Diane, cried with joy over the phone. My mother said she'd be on a plane from Columbus first thing in the morning. I smiled and said the right things, and inside I was doing an archaeological excavation of 11 years, re-examining everything with new eyes. We came home 3 days later. We settled into the exhausted, beautiful chaos of new parenthood. Anna was on maternity leave, which was unusual and precious for her, and for about 2 weeks I told myself I was overreacting. Derek had stopped by the hospital. It was thoughtless, it was inconsiderate, but maybe it was what Anna said, a colleague being enthusiastic. Maybe I needed to let it go. I didn't let it go. But I let myself believe I had, which is different. 6 weeks after Noah was born, Anna went back to her brigade for a half-day administrative meeting. She left at 9. At 11:15, I was nursing Noah through a fussy stretch and I picked up Anna's iPad to put on some white noise from her streaming app. It was open to her messages. I want to be honest, I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for anything. But the screen was open, the conversation was right there, and the preview line that was already visible before I could look away said, "From Derek Cole, miss you too, can't wait to see you properly once things settle." I put Noah in the bassinet. I sat down. And I read. It went back 4 months. 4 months of messages, while Anna was pregnant with my child, while I was managing our household and our lives around her career and her pregnancy, while I was sleeping next to her and believing with my whole heart that we were building something together. Derek and Anna had been communicating every single day. At first the messages looked collegial, professional. But they decayed quickly into something else. Private jokes I wasn't part of. References to memories I'd never heard about. A slow, deliberate emotional intimacy that had been built in the margins of my marriage. 2 months before Noah was born, I wish things had been different for us. You know, I've always thought you were the one. Anna, 6 days later, me too, honestly. Don't say that though. Makes it harder. 1 month before Noah was born, I know this is complicated. But what we had was real. What we still have is real. Anna, I know. I know it is. The day Anna went into labor, the actual day, the day I drove her to the hospital in a panic at 2 in the morning and held her hand and watched my son enter the world, Derek had sent, "Thinking of you. You okay?" Anna, from a hospital bathroom at some point between contractions, scared. But okay. Larry's been amazing. I feel terrible. Derek, you shouldn't. You can't help how you feel. She felt terrible. She felt terrible, and she still let him come hold our son. I sat in our kitchen with my son in the bassinet beside me and I read every word. Then I went back and read them again. Then I took screenshots, every single page, and emailed them to myself from her iPad. Then I put the iPad back exactly where it was. When Anna came home at 1 o'clock she found me at the kitchen table, calm and quiet, heating up lunch like nothing had happened. I asked her how the meeting was. She said routine. I nodded and handed her a plate and watched her eat, and I thought about how well I now understood the distance that had been living in our house for months. I called my brother, Pete, that evening while Anna was nursing Noah. Pete is 3 years older than me and has been one of my closest friends my entire life. I drove to his house in Reston, 35 minutes, and I sat in his kitchen and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the best things about Pete. When I finished, he said, "What do you need?" "I need you to help me think clearly," I said. "Because right now I want to burn everything down and I know I can't do that." "Okay," he said. "Let's think clearly." We spent 3 hours at his kitchen table. Pete helped me organize what I had, what I needed, and what my options were. We talked about Noah, 2 months old, completely dependent, the person in all of this who deserved the most protection. We talked about the legal landscape of divorce in Virginia. Pete had a friend, a family law attorney named Gregory Walsh, who he'd gotten to know during a difficult period in his own life years back. Pete texted Gregory that night and Gregory agreed to take a consultation call the next morning. Gregory was thorough and direct. He outlined exactly what I needed to document, what I needed to protect financially, and what my rights as Noah's father looked like in Virginia. Get everything organized before you have the conversation with your wife, he told me. Don't move money or do anything dramatic. Just know where things stand. I followed every word of his advice. I spent the next 10 days being the best version of a calm, attentive husband and father that I could manage, while underneath I was quietly doing the work. I cataloged our joint assets. I opened a personal checking account and began moving my freelance income there. I made copies of important documents, tax returns, property records, insurance policies, Noah's birth certificate. I put everything in a binder that I kept at Pete's house. Gregory Walsh reviewed everything I'd gathered and gave me a picture of where I stood. On the 18th day after reading those messages, Anna told me she needed to attend a weekend training exercise, a Friday through Sunday situation she'd been notified about, she said, by Colonel Derek Cole, who was organizing logistics. She was sorry for the short notice. She'd already arranged for her mother to come help with Noah. I said that was fine. I smiled and told her to drive safe. And then I called Diane, Anna's mother, who arrived Friday afternoon as planned. Anna left at 7 in the morning on Friday. At 11 that morning, Pete called me from his car outside Derek Cole's apartment building in Arlington. He'd followed Derek from the base. Derek had driven straight home and had not gone to any training facility. At 11:45, Pete texted me a photograph. Anna's car was parked in the visitor spot outside Derek's building. I sat in our kitchen with Diane in the next room playing with Noah, and I looked at the photograph on my phone, and something inside me, the last thread of anything that had been holding me in a state of uncertainty, went absolutely quiet. I called Gregory Walsh. I called my brother. And then I did the thing that I had decided I was going to do. I called Diane. She came into the kitchen, still carrying Noah, and she looked at my face and her expression changed immediately. She said, "Larry, what's wrong?" I told her everything. I showed her the screenshots. I showed her Pete's photograph. I showed her the message Anna had sent from the hospital bathroom on the night our son was born. I watched Diane's face go from confusion to disbelief to a grief so raw and visible that I had to look away. She sat down heavily in a kitchen chair. She held Noah against her chest and she was silent for a long time. "My daughter," she said finally. And the way she said it was not a defense. It was something closer to an obituary. "I need you to know," I told her, "because Noah is going to need people around him who are honest. And because you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening in this house." Diane stayed. She stayed the whole weekend, and she was not on Anna's side, which mattered more to me than I expected. Diane had been a constant in my life for 11 years. She had always treated me like a son. And when Anna walked through the door Sunday evening, tired and carrying a bag that had obviously not been used for any military exercise, Diane was sitting in the living room waiting for her. I'll give Anna credit for one thing: when she walked in and saw both of us, she knew immediately. She didn't play innocent. She set her bag down and she looked at me and she said, "Larry." "Sit down, Anna," I said. What followed was the conversation I had been preparing for 18 days. I didn't yell. I had yelled, in my head, 1,000 times, but there in our living room with Noah asleep upstairs and Diane sitting quietly in the corner, I was past yelling. I was somewhere colder and more precise. I told her what I'd found on the iPad. I told her about Pete following Derek. I told her about the photograph. I told her about every message I'd read, in order, from 4 months before our son was born to the previous week. I told her I knew she'd been with Derek that weekend. I asked her, once, directly, whether she wanted to tell me the truth or whether she wanted to continue lying. She told the truth. All of it came out in stages. She was crying, and for the first time I noticed that her crying didn't move me the way it once had. She and Derek had rekindled things 8 months before Noah was born, she said. It had started as emotional, she said. It had become physical before she got pregnant. She didn't know, she genuinely did not know, whether Noah was Derek's. The room tilted. Diane made a sound like something had been pulled out of her. I stood up. I walked upstairs. I went into Noah's room and I stood over his crib and I looked at my sleeping son, and I told myself what Gregory Walsh had told me the week before when I'd raised this possibility in a hypothetical: whatever a paternity test says, you have been this child's father from the moment he was born, and the law in your own heart will determine what that means going forward. I stood there for a long time. When I came back downstairs, Anna was still crying. I told her I wanted a paternity test. I told her I was filing for divorce. I told her I would be staying in the house for now because Gregory Walsh had advised me not to leave the marital home. And I told her that Diane would be staying as well, because Noah needed someone stable nearby, and because I was not going to be the one to leave my son. Anna's brigade found out on Monday. Not from me, from Pete, who had sent the photograph and a brief factual summary to 3 people in Anna's professional network who happened to be people Derek Cole worked closely with. I had not asked Pete to do this. When he told me, I asked him why. Because he's an officer who used his rank and position to access your wife on a weekend he manufactured through his logistics authority, Pete said. That's not just a personal affair. That's a professional abuse. Pete wasn't wrong. An Inspector General inquiry was opened within the week. Derek Cole, it turned out, had used his authority as a brigade logistics coordinator to create a fictional training exercise specifically to give Anna cover for the weekend. When that came to light, the investigation expanded. By the time the month was out, Derek Cole was facing potential UCMJ violations and had been reassigned pending review. I watched it happen from a distance, the same way I watched everything in those weeks, with a kind of exhausted, hollow detachment. I had Gregory Walsh moving on the divorce proceedings. I had a paternity test ordered through a legal DNA service. I had Pete and his wife helping me with Noah on the days I needed to work. And I had Diane, who had essentially moved into our guest room and was a daily, devoted presence in Noah's life and, quietly, in mine. The paternity test came back 3 weeks later. Noah was mine. He was 100%, unambiguously mine. I'm not going to pretend I was calm when I opened that result. I had told myself I was prepared for any outcome, that I had already decided to be Noah's father regardless of what the test showed, and all of that was true. But when I saw that result, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a CVS and I cried for about 20 minutes, not from grief this time, but from something that felt like the particular relief of a man who has been holding his breath for 3 weeks and has finally been allowed to breathe. I texted Pete, he's mine. Pete called me immediately. He was crying too, which I will never tell him I remember, because it would embarrass him. Diane bought Noah a small stuffed bear that afternoon. She didn't say anything about why. She just set it in the crib next to him, and I understood. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. Anna did not contest it. She moved out of the house in June. Diane helped her pack, which struck me as one of the more complicated acts of love I've ever witnessed. Anna got an apartment in Alexandria. We established a joint custody arrangement with Noah as primary residence with me, given that my work schedule was flexible and Anna's military obligations were extensive and unpredictable. Gregory Walsh was thorough and effective, and by December, I was legally single for the first time since I was 28. Derek Cole received a formal reprimand and was passed over for promotion, a professional consequence in the military that effectively ends an upward trajectory. He and Anna did not end up together. Whatever Anna had imagined her future with Derek looked like, the reality of his professional collapse, combined with the full exposure of what they'd done, apparently made for less romantic conditions than their secret had allowed. I heard through Diane that Derek had transferred to a duty station in Georgia by spring. Anna asked to talk, not about the divorce, that was settled, but just to talk, about 4 months after she'd moved out. We met at a coffee shop in Fairfax. She looked tired and thinner. She told me she was in therapy. She told me she knew what she had done was unforgivable, and she wasn't there to ask forgiveness. She was there to tell me, she said, that she was sorry for what she'd done to me specifically, not just to the marriage. I listened. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I told her I would always be civil and cooperative because of Noah, and that I needed her to be a present, honest mother to him, and that was the extent of what I required from her going forward. She nodded. She didn't try to hug me on the way out. I respected her for that. I spent the following year working. I had rebuilt my consulting practice more aggressively than I'd ever allowed myself to before, partly because I needed the income and partly because having a concrete project, something I could build and measure and control, was the best medicine I found for everything else. Within 6 months of the divorce being finalized, I had signed 2 contracts with infrastructure firms that tripled my previous freelance income. I hired a part-time assistant. I began working on a proposal that would eventually land me a contract to consult on a major bridge retrofit project in Northern Virginia, work that would run for 3 years and establish my firm as a real entity rather than a one-man operation. The gym became a habit rather than an obligation. I'd always been reasonably active, but in the months after everything happened I found that I needed the physical anchor of it, an hour every morning before Noah woke up, a place where the only thing that mattered was whether I could do what I decided to do. I lost 15 pounds. My brother started joining me on Saturdays, which became a tradition. I felt, for the first time in years, like I was living in a body I recognized. Noah turned 1 in April. We had a small party, Pete and his wife, my parents, Diane, a handful of close friends. Anna came for 2 hours and was appropriate and warm and then left without incident. Noah wore a ridiculous paper crown that Pete's wife had made and spent the whole party trying to eat his birthday cake with both fists. Watching him, I felt something that I can only describe as uncomplicated, pure, simple, unqualified joy that had nothing to do with anything except the small human in front of me who was discovering cake for the first time. I started seeing someone in the fall of that year, a woman named Claire who I met through a mutual friend at a dinner party Pete and his wife hosted. She taught high school history in Arlington. She was straightforward and funny and completely unintimidating in the way that only people who are genuinely comfortable with themselves manage to be. I told her early that I was divorced with a toddler and that I was cautious, and she said that was reasonable and that she was in no hurry for anything. We went slowly. We had dinners. We walked in parks with Noah, who Claire approached with such patient, gentle attention that I found myself more moved by watching that than I'd expected. She understood that Noah came first, not as a concession but as an actual fact that she embraced without drama. By spring, she was a regular part of our weekends. By summer, Noah called her Claire in the flat, confident way that toddlers name the things in their world that belong there. I don't want to overclaim what Claire and I are, because it is still becoming what it's going to be. What I know is that I am genuinely happy, not performing happiness, not recovering toward happiness, but actually happy, in the specific way that comes from a life that has been rebuilt on honest foundations. It was November, 2 years after the day in the hospital, when I saw Derek Cole in person for the last time. He was at a gas station in Fairfax. I'd driven up for a meeting. He was filling up a car I didn't recognize, wearing civilian clothes, and he looked like someone the years had not been generous to. He'd gained weight, or lost it unevenly, or both. There was a slackness around him that I didn't remember. He saw me. I know he did, because he looked up and our eyes met across 2 lanes of pumps and then he looked away first, quickly, as if he'd been hoping I hadn't noticed. He finished with his gas, got in his car, and pulled out without ever looking back over. I watched him go and felt nothing in particular. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even pity. Just the mild awareness of a chapter that had already been fully closed. I finished filling my own tank, got back in my car, and called Pete to confirm our lunch plans. The morning after Noah's 2nd birthday, I was making coffee in our kitchen, my kitchen, the one I'd stayed in, the one I'd built our daily life around, and Noah was in his chair eating cereal, methodically picking out every Cheerio with 2 fingers and placing each one into his mouth like small, important work. The morning light was coming through the back windows, the way it does in late April when it's finally warm enough to leave the window over the sink cracked open. I could hear birds. I could hear Noah making small satisfied sounds over his cereal. I thought about the men who had stood in a hospital doorway 2 years ago with 2 coffees going cold in a cardboard tray, watching his wife's ex-boyfriend hold his newborn son. I thought about how completely certain that man had been, right up until that moment, that his life was solid ground. I thought about everything that had happened since, the messages, the photograph, the divorce, the paternity test, Gregory Walsh and Pete and Diane and the long, specific work of rebuilding. I did not feel sorry for that man, exactly. But I felt something for him, a kind of retrospective tenderness, the way you might feel for a younger version of yourself who didn't yet know what they were capable of surviving. He had walked into that hospital room with coffee for his wife, and his world had ended, and he had not known yet that something better was on the other side of it. He had not known yet what he was worth, or what he would build, or who Noah was going to become, or that April mornings in his own kitchen would eventually feel like this, like enough, like more than enough, like everything. I poured my coffee. I sat down across from my son. Noah looked up from his Cheerios and gave me the grin he'd inherited from my side of the family, wide and uncomplicated and absolutely certain of its welcome. "Good morning, buddy," I said. He held up a Cheerio between two small fingers, offering it to me with great ceremony. I took it. I ate it. He dissolved into giggles. The window over the sink was still open. The birds were still going. The coffee was hot. The morning was entirely, simply ours. I had heard through Diane, a few weeks earlier, that Anna was doing better, that she was making genuine progress in therapy, that she was present and reliable with Noah on her custody days, that she seemed to be working hard toward something. I was glad for Noah's sake. I did not need anything more than that from her, and I no longer needed anything less. Derek Cole, as far as I knew, was still in Georgia, still passed over, still living with what he'd chosen. Diane mentioned once that Anna had heard he'd tried to reconnect with someone from his past and it hadn't worked out. I hadn't asked for more detail. I genuinely did not care enough to want it. What I had was a son who was learning to run, who had recently discovered the concept of dogs and could not see one without stopping completely and staring with his entire soul. What I had was a business that was expanding past what I'd imagined. What I had was a brother who had shown up for me in ways I would spend years trying to properly repay. What I had was a woman who brought a kind of honest warmth into our home that neither Noah nor I had been looking for and both of us had clearly needed. What I had was a life that was mine, that I had built with my own hands from the rubble of something that had broken, that bore no resemblance to the future I'd imagined in that hospital room 2 years ago, and was better than that future in every way that mattered. The day someone you love betrays you is the worst day. I don't want to smooth over that. The weeks after are the worst weeks. The sleeplessness, the grief, the anger that has Northwest clean place to go, the particular humiliation of realizing that a story you believed about yourself and your life was not entirely true, all of that is real and it cost something real. I don't want to suggest that what happened to me was secretly a gift or that betrayal is a useful growth experience. It was terrible. It should not have happened. But I am on the other side of it now, and the other side is good. The other side has morning light and my son eating cereal and coffee that's exactly the right temperature and a future that I can see clearly and move toward without fear. I would not go back. Not for anything. Not for her. Not for the version of my life that was built on a foundation I hadn't been allowed to see clearly. Not for one moment of the before, no matter how good it had felt while I was living in it. Noah finished his cereal. He looked at me with Cheerio dust on both cheeks and said, with great confidence, "More." I laughed and got him more.